Hey guys, Wes here, and we're going to build a simple image gallery where we can actually upload images to Azure Blob storage. Okay, so here is a very brief look at the application that we'll be building over this series. So we have a very simple image gallery application. It's built completely in ASP.NET Core 2.0 using ASP.NET Core MVC. And so you'll see that we have a gallery page here with just a few images in it at the moment, and we can click on any one of these images and go to a simple detail view. So for now, that's what we have. We have some metadata on each of these images, including a title, when the image was created, as well as some tags that will actually build out a search feature to allow users to search for images. So our application will grow beyond this point. We'll also have the ability to upload new images and have those images stored in the cloud using Azure Blob Storage. So we'll be building out a complete MVC application with a service layer and a web layer, and we'll use a SQL Server as our backend. So you'll want to make sure that you have ASP.NET Core 2.0 installed on your machine and SQL Server Management Studio with SQL Server Express installed. I'll be using Visual Studio 2017 to do all the coding for this series as well, so if you'd like to follow along directly, I would recommend just downloading the free version of Visual Studio 2017 as well. We'll start out by using some images that are hosted remotely just to kind of show how the web layer works. And then we'll move on to hosting images locally on our own machine, and then finally hosting images, as I mentioned, in the cloud on Azure. So we'll work our way there over the course of the next several videos. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the series. Okay, so let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio. And we're going to create a new project. And we will select ASP.NET Core Web Application. And I'm just going to call this Simple Image Gallery, and just be sure to pick a location maybe with other development projects that you're working on, and then we will create a directory for the solution and also create a Git repository here. So we'll select OK, and then we'll have the option to choose from a number of different templates now that we're using ASP.NET Core 2.0. So first of all, make sure that we are using .NET Core and that we're using specifically ASP.NET Core 2.0. And then we're just going to select the web application, which will be implementing the model view controller pattern. And we're not going to worry about authentication for this particular version of the app. So this will just take a moment, and it is going to scaffold out a very simple MVC app for us, which we'll see here in just a moment. So we have a few different folders. We have directories for our controllers, models, and views. And if we just take a peek in here, we can see that we have a simple home controller. And this has got a few actions on it. We have an index, about, and contact action, and some corresponding views here, it looks like. And then one simple view model here looks like for an error view. So that's all good. We won't be really using any of the scaffolded out MVC stuff. We'll just be writing our own here, but we will use these directories. And you can see we have an app settings.json file, a bower.json file, and a bundle config. And then we have our program.cs and startup.cs. So you'll be familiar with these files if you're coming from ASP.NET Core 1.0. There are some differences here. If we take a look in program.cs, you can see that we have an iWebhost build webhost method here, and we're just calling create default builder on it. So there's a lot that's actually kind of packaged into this method, which is something that's quite a bit different from ASP.NET Core 1.0. So we won't go into all the details here in this particular series, but just be aware that this is still the main entry point for our web app. And then if we take a look in our startup.cs class, and we scroll down a bit, you can see that we have the constructor here, and then we have this configure services method still. This will be where we register services for dependency injection into our controllers, and we'll have just probably one or two simple services for this series. And then we have this configure method, And this is where we configure our HTTP request pipeline, so our middleware here. So you can see that we're saying things like use static files. We'll take a look at those in a moment here. Use MVC, and then we show how we actually are going to configure our routes and our routing for this application. So in this case, we will have like our app/controller/action and then some optional ID. You can also see that we have the ability to change some things rather easily here, depending on whether we're in a development environment or a production or a staging or environment. However we'd like to configure that. We have the ability here to do things like, for example, use developer exception page, where we might do things like actually show the stack trace for a particular error that gets thrown in the browser. Otherwise, we have some custom error page. So we can do sorts of different types of configuration like that here, and that's all handled in our configure method that's in the startup class. Okay, so we'll be revisiting this soon. For now, let's go ahead and create our first controller. So if we expand controllers here, we won't worry about our home controller for now. What I'm going to do is go ahead and add a new controller, and we'll select minimal dependencies. So we'll go ahead and right click on controllers, and we'll add a new controller, and we'll just make it an empty MVC controller. And we're going to call it image gallery controller, or let's just call it actually a gallery controller. And so this is going to scaffold out a very basic controller class for us. So you can see that it's extending this controller base class. This is coming from ASP.NET Core MVC. And then we have a simple index action that's just returning an empty view. So let's just kind of get right into it here. We're going to have a gallery, and so we have to think about what we actually want to pass in terms of a model to the view that represents our gallery. So we know for sure that we're going to store that in a view model. So we'll say var model is equal to, and we'll make a new gallery index model, which of course we'll have to create. And then we'll pass this to our view. So let's go ahead and create this class. We're going to create that in our models folder. So this models folder will contain all of our view models. We'll go ahead and add a new class, call it gallery index model. And so now let's just think about the type of data that we'd like the user to see or interact with on our gallery index page. So first of all, we'll have a series of images, of course, for the user to perhaps click on. So we'll have an enumerable collection of gallery images. And this will be another type that we need to create. We'll call this property images, and then we'll write our auto property here. Okay, and then the next thing that I'd like to provide on our gallery index view is a search box that a user could perhaps write a query and get images that have some metadata associated with whatever the user's queried returned back to this view. So what we can do is go ahead and create a string search query, and we'll use this particular property to store that user's input. Okay, so now clearly we need to create a gallery image model, but in this case I'd like this to actually be a domain model or an entity model rather than a view model. So this will map directly to a record in our database, perhaps in like a gallery images table. So for that, I'm actually going to create a new project in our solution. So we'll go ahead and right click here, and we'll add a new project. And in this case, it's just going to be a .NET Core class library, and we're going to call it simple image gallery .data. And you can see that it's going to create a simple class here, just call it class 1, and we'll use this class as our DB context. So let's call it simple image gallery DB context, and we'll extend DB context. So we'll actually need to add a few packages here now to set this up. So if we right click on simple image gallery.data, so our data project, and we're going to select manage NuGet packages. And then we'll select browse. And first of all, we need to bring in Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. So we'll go ahead and install that, and we'll accept the terms. Next, we're going to install Entity Framework Core.tools. This should allow us to actually run database migrations from our package manager console, which we'll look at in just a little while. And then we'll also install Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. We'll use SQL Server as our backend for this project. Okay, with those dependencies installed, I'm just going to go ahead and close this tab. And now we should import Microsoft Entity Framework Core.db context here. The other thing I'm going to do is actually rename this file from class1 to simple image gallery db context. Okay, so we can kind of think of our db context as our database, and the particular database that will be the backend for this application. And so what we need to do here is actually create a constructor. So we'll just say public simple image gallery db context. And we'll instantiate that with some db context options. And then we'll call base options to ensure that this gets passed to the db context base class. And so here's our simple constructor. And then in our db context class, so in this class, we're actually going to define some db sets. And these will represent, in a sense, the tables that will be in our simple image gallery database. And so we're going to have a public db set of gallery images, and we'll call this table gallery images, and then write our auto property here. And so this gallery image is the same entity model that we would then also like to use at some point in one of our views, in our gallery index view here. So if we come back, what I'm going to do is now actually create a new folder in our data project called models. And then here we'll add our class for our gallery image. Okay, so we'll make this class public. And now we have to think a little bit about what particular properties we would like to have on an instance of a gallery image. So first of all, let's just go ahead and give each of our images a simple title. And then perhaps we'll have a date time for when that image was created. And since we'll be storing the images in the cloud, what I'm going to do is create a URL string that we can use to actually point to, the location of that image on the web, that we can then, use that to create things like image tags and links when we actually start building out our views. So each gallery image will have a specific URL where it's hosted. And then maybe finally we'll have this collection of strings, and this will represent the tags that are on that particular image. So we'll provide the ability for users to actually tag images with some metadata that we can then use to search on in our gallery. Okay, cool. So we're actually almost ready to run our first database migration, at which point our gallery image table will be created with columns for the title, created URL, and tags. And that reminds me, we should also provide an int ID. We could also make it a long, but yeah, we'll have an ID, and that will of course be the primary key on each of our gallery image objects. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is to actually go back up into our web project here. And let's take a look at our app-settings.json file. So you can see we have a simple JSON object here that specifies this logging object, which has sort of key value pairs for some things that we'd like to configure perhaps regarding logging. Then we have this app-settings.development.json file that looks like it logs some additional information here. With the default way that our application gets built, and we only currently have this development environment, but what it's going to do is it's actually going to load whatever is in our app-settings.json, and then whatever is in our app settings for that particular environment.json file. For this series, we're not going to be worrying about configuring different types of environments. We're just going to be building a simple version of this application with a single environment. And so in our app settings.json base configuration file, what I'm going to do is create a new object for our connection strings. And then we're just going to give this connection string a name, and I'm just going to call it default connection. And then we're going to provide a connection string to a SQL database. So you want to make sure that you have Microsoft SQL Server installed on your machine, and you should also make sure that you have an instance of local DB running. So let's go ahead and check that out very quickly. So I'm going to fire up Commander here, and if I just type in SQL local DB info, we can see that I have Microsoft SQL local DB running. Mine's called MS SQL local DB. So if we go back into our default connection here, what I'm going to do is set the server equal to local DB, and then escape the backslash, and we'll have Microsoft or MS SQL local DB. And then we can name our database, which I'm just going to call simple image gallery. And we'll set this trusted connection equal to true. And then we'll set multiple active result sets equal to true as well. So this is a pretty standard connection string to a SQL database, which you may have used something like this before if you've developed any other ASP.NET applications in the past. And so now that we have a connection string set up, what I'm going to do is go back into our gallery controller, and we need to import our gallery index model. And now I'm going to right click on simple image gallery, and we're going to add a reference to our data project. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just build the project. And it looks like we have a few errors to clean up here. So let's go to the first one, which is in our data project in the DB context. And we need to make sure that we import the gallery image model that we just created. And so let's go ahead and rebuild our solution again. And we have one more error to fix here. This is in our gallery index model class. And we should go ahead and bring in the using here as well. So then if I control period at the top of this file, I can remove the unused directives, and we'll go ahead and rebuild the solution. Okay, so everything's looking pretty good. So now let's head back up into our web project and into the startup class here. And what I'm going to do is down in our configure services method, I'm going to go ahead and say services.addDBContext. And here we need to specify our simple image gallery, DB context. And then we can pass it some options here on this lambda. And we'll say use SQL Server. And then we need to actually pass it a particular connection string that we'd like it to connect to. So say configuration.getConnectionString. This is all provided for us, which is kind of nice. And then we just pass it the name, the key in our JSON file that we were just working with a few moments ago, which is default connection. Oops, and I had an extra parens here as well. So I'm just going to move this down to another line so you can kind of see it a little bit better. And so this connection string default connection again corresponds in our app settings.json here to this default connection in our connection strings. So it's kind of nice how simple that is to point our application to the particular database that we'll be interacting with. Okay, and actually we need to go back and take a quick look at our gallery image object, and what I'm going to do here on our tags is rather than make this a collection of strings, what I'm going to do is make this a virtual enumerable of tag, and we'll actually create another domain model for tags that images might have. Otherwise, when Entity Framework tries to create this gallery image table, it's not really going to understand how to map just a collection of strings to this object, and so we could specify it as unmapped, but on the other hand, I would like to actually use the tags to query for objects in our database, so I'm going to represent that as this tag type. So in our models, we'll go ahead and create another class called tag, and actually let's call it image tag, make it public, and we'll very simply just give it an int ID and then a string description. Okay, so then back in our gallery image class, we're going to rename this image tag. And so now we'll have a collection of image tag objects that may correspond to a particular gallery image. So we have a sort of one-to-many relationship here where a single image may have many different image tags. And I'll just go ahead and clean up this single unused using here. And now finally we'll head back into simple image gallery DB context, and we'll add a DB set here for our image tags as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try to run our first database migration for our application here. So to do that, we need to head to the Package Manager console, and we can get there from View, Other Windows, Package Manager console, and we'll just be sure that the default project is set to simpleimagegallery.data, and then we'll add migration, and then in quotes, initial migration. So we'll try to run this, and you can see that it has now run. It's created a migrations folder in our data project, and then we have a simple initial migration C# file here, and you can see what it's essentially doing. So Entity Framework has taken a look at our DB context class and the gallery image and image tag DB sets that we've created here, and what it's going to do is look into these classes and check and see if it has a table in a particular database, if the database even exists at first. It's then going to check to see if it has tables mapped to either of these classes. If not, it's going to go ahead and create them, and it's going to create columns corresponding to each of the properties that are on these classes. And you can kind of see that happening here if you just take a peek at the code that was generated here in our migration class. You can see we have this migration builder object, and then we have methods like create table on it, and we're specifying a name for the table and some columns. You could of course manually edit these migration files too if you want to make some kind of change. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And you can also see that it is setting the primary keys that are getting mapped to the ID property on each of our objects, and also this foreign key relationship is getting created that is linking our gallery images over to the image tags. So that looks pretty good. Now all we need to do is actually run the command update database. And so what this is going to do is essentially make a connection to SQL Server that's running locally here, and it's going to go ahead and create this new database for us and do our first migration here. So we'll have a schema with these two tables in it. Okay, and it looks like I'm getting an error here that says there was an error occurred while establishing a connection to SQL Server. The server was not found or was not accessible. Verify that the instance name is correct and that SQL Server is configured to allow remote connections. The specified local DB instance does not exist. So what I'm going to do to troubleshoot here is to just go ahead and open up SQL Server Management Studio, and we're just going to connect to localDB /MS SQL localDB and go ahead and see if we can connect. Okay, so that's looking good. We have a number of different databases that I've created in the past here, so I know that we have a connection. So let's go ahead and just check our connection string, just kind of double check and make sure that we have set that up correctly. So we'll head back into app settings.json. So I'm going to move this off to one side here, and then we'll take a look at SQL Server Management Studio. And I see our typo here, so this should be MS SQL Local DB. So I'm going to go ahead and maximize this again. And be sure you get your connection string right. I typed mine in incorrectly here, but we should be trying to connect to local DB in parens and then an escaped backslash MS SQL Local DB with 2 S's here. And I had previously just provided 1 S. So let's go ahead and try to rerun update database. And so it's making a connection to our local DB instance, and it's going to go ahead and create this simple image gallery database. And you can see that it says done. So if we head back into Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and then I'm just going to click refresh here on our local DB instance, and then expand databases, and now we can see this simple image gallery database among the list of databases that you may already have on your machine. If we expand this and then expand tables, we can also see now that we have a gallery image table with an ID, created, title, and URL, and an image tags table here that just has an ID and a description, and then a foreign key back to a particular gallery image ID. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to just go ahead and minimize SQL Server Management Studio for right now. And I'll close my app settings, and we can also close the package manager console for the time being. I'm just going to go ahead and also close all the tabs. And if you're tracking this project using Git, then this may be a good time, perhaps a bit late, but this may be a good time to make a commit. Okay, so back in our project here, we had started building this gallery controller before we created the data layer for our application and ran our first database migration. So we had decided that we were going to have a gallery index where we would actually use the gallery index view model to display some images and the ability to post a search query on this page. So let's go ahead, and before we actually use our backend here and some services to either push or pull our own data onto the page here, let's just go ahead and create a sort of some mock data that we can use just to demonstrate how the controller and the view model and the view are all working together. So you can see that anytime we have this gallery index model, we need to supply some images as a list of our gallery image object, and potentially a search query here that the user could use in like a search form. And so what I'll do is probably just have 3 sort of mock images that we can then pass to our image list. So we'll say images is equal to some image list that we'll actually go ahead and create. So we'll do that just above here. Our image list is equal to a new list of gallery images. Oops, and we don't need the semicolon here. And here we can just go ahead and build that out. So we'll specify a title, and let's just go ahead and build out 3 images for our sort of mock implementation. So our first image will have a title of, say, like hiking trip or something. URL we will provide in just a little while here. Created, we can have datetime.now, and then tags, we'll just mock out a quick like hiking image tags collection that we will specify above here. So this will be a new list of image tags. And let's go ahead and create another set of tags here. And we'll call this city image tags. And so what we'll do is we'll create 2 more gallery images in our sort of demonstration here. So we have one for hiking trip. One title will say, on the trail. we'll provide a URL here in a moment, and again we'll hook it up with the hiking image tags. And then for our third gallery image, we'll just title it downtown, and for the tags here we can provide the city image tags. Okay, so if we head back up here into our tags, what we'll do is we'll just have some sort of mock objects here. We'll say tag 1 is a new image tag, and the description will be like adventure, and we'll make the ID 0, and I'll create just 3 different tags here. So we'll have adventure, and then maybe we'll have one called urban, and we'll create a third tag here, and we'll make the description like New York with an ID of 2. So these are just sort of mock objects, again, that will eventually be provided back by our own data, and then we'll have a service that actually, you know, handles passing these particular instances around. So for now, we'll just go ahead and create 3 mock tags with descriptions and IDs. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold these. And then we have a new image list here that has 3 gallery images in it, each with a title, an empty URL for the moment created on of datetime.now, and one of our image tag collections. So one thing that we forgot to do here is we'll say hiking image tags.add tag 1, and then city image tags.add range, and we'll just go ahead and add range tag 2 and tag 3. And here we need to say new list of image tag. Okay, so now we have a collection of hiking image tags that contains this single tag here, adventure, and then our city image tags contain the urban tag and the New York tag as well. And then in each of our gallery images, I assign one of these collection of tags to map to this tags property that is on each of our gallery image objects. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and collapse each of these. So we'll have an image list of 3 gallery images, each of which should have all their properties except for the URLs. And then we have our view model here, in which this image's property gets set to the image list that we just constructed. And our search query will just make an empty string for the time being. Now, let's go ahead and, again, just for demo purposes, fill out the URLs here. So we'll provide some URLs now that, you know, won't be hosted ourselves, but will be hosted remotely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Pexels, and we'll just find a few images to use very briefly. So I'll just search for hiking, and we'll scroll around until we find a nice image that we might want to use. So this one looks pretty good. If we select download, we can see the URL for this particular file. You definitely don't want to have a reference to someone else's hosted image if you're using it on your own website. Again, this is just strictly for demo purposes. So we'll go ahead and paste that in our URL here. And shortly after we demonstrate this, we will be replacing it with our own images that the user can then upload to our application. So then we have another hiking image, so we'll go back and just select something else. Likewise, we'll get the URL for this image. And then we have one more image to grab here, and we'll go ahead and grab this URL. All right, very good. So let's go ahead and save this. And so we have a sort of mocked out index action here. Well, the view model that we'll actually pass down is mocked out. So let's go ahead and create our view now. So I'll open up the Solution Explorer and just go ahead and pin it. And then in views, I'm going to open this up and we'll collapse home. I'm just going to right click here and add a new folder, and we'll call this gallery. And then in gallery, we'll add a new item, and we'll make it an MVC view page called index.cshtml. I like to just create a vanilla view without having Visual Studio scaffolded out, because sometimes it provides more than we actually need. And so at the top of our view here, we'll be using Razor syntax to specify the model that we'll be using on this view. So we'll do that with spiral model with lowercase m, And then here we need to provide the actual model. So we'll go into our models namespace, and then gallery index model will be what we're using here. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a simple div of class container body content, and then we'll make a div of gallery content. And then what I'm going to say is just at for each of our image in capital M model.images, we are going to create a new div of class gallery-image, and we'll just have this be an empty div for the time being. Now we need to go define some of these classes in our CSS. So we can do that if you expand this www root directory here. This is where all the static files for our application are getting served up from. And then we have this CSS folder that contains our site.css. So you can see that we have just a minimal amount of CSS defined for us here. We could create a new to specify some custom CSS, but in our case, I'm just going to go ahead and create it in this file. So I just need to define a few new classes here. We have this gallery content and gallery image. The remaining classes here are coming from what's been defined in our application already. Note also that because we use the template, we also have Bootstrap available to us. So let's go ahead and create a gallery content and gallery image class. And what I'm going to say here for gallery image is we'll specify some padding of say 8 pixels, and then we'll specify a default background color of white, a tiny border radius of 2 pixels. We'll display inline block, and we'll specify an explicit width and height of 300 pixels. I'm going to give just a little bit of margin as well. Maybe we'll make this 12 pixels. And position relative. And I'm just going to supply a little bit of box shadow on this element. Fairly transparent here. Okay, so it's going to specify sort of the little container that each of our images will be contained in. And then our gallery content container will specify a bit of padding as well. And we can make additional modifications to that if we need. So let's go back into our view. So we now have definitions for both of our CSS classes that we're implementing here. And then we have a for each loop where we're actually looping through each of the images that will pass, whatever model gets past this view. And though we may not want to put it out on the screen, in the final application, just to kind of demonstrate how this is working, we can also just throw out the title. We'll wrap in a span onto the page 2 just to show some of that data. And then maybe in another for each, we can say var tag in image.tags. We can create an unordered list. Oops, and the ULs obviously need to go outside of this for each. Of our tag.description. And so now we have a sort of nested for each loop here. So we'll have the set of gallery images, and then on each of those images, for each of that image's tag, we'll put the tag description out to the page as well. Again, just kind of a simple version to demonstrate how we can get this working. Let's go ahead and build our solution. And I'm going to go ahead and make a commit as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and just fire up IS Express. And we don't have a link in our app yet to the gallery controller, so we can just, at the URL, provide /gallery. And so you can see already that we are getting 3 of our images out to the page here. So we don't actually have the images themselves, we're getting the tags out, and then it looks like we have a slight issue here with a title. So let's go ahead and fix that. Here we need to provide a spiral for image.title. If we go back and refresh, now we can see the titles. So let's go ahead and get these images out to each of their sort of containers here. And the way that I'm going to do that is provide some inline CSS here on our gallery image div. So we'll provide a background image and set the URL equal to @image.url. Okay, so we'll save that and go ahead and refresh our page. So now we're getting an unresized version of each of the images. What we'll do in the future for our own images is actually implement some image magic here to actually crop the images that a user would upload to their application. But for now, we could also just, resize this using a little bit of CSS. It's not ideal because the user still is actually accessing that large version of the image and then just getting it styled down to size. But let's go ahead and do that for now anyway. Back in our CSS, in our site.css, what I can do is say background size 100%, background repeat, no repeat, and background position center. And so if we refresh the page now, you can see that our images aren't square, so we're not actually cropping them, but they are now fitting within each of our containers. We could say, if we wanted just it to look a little bit perhaps nicer without doing any actual cropping here, we could say 100%, 100%. And then if I refresh, now the image is sort of sized to the entire cell, but you can see that there's some distortion going on as the image is stretched. There's perhaps even a better way. Rather than do background size 100% at all, we could just say cover. And if we refresh now, we can see that the images just essentially fill the maximum amount of area they have in their div. Of course, some of the image gets cut off, but we don't have any distortion. And what I'd like to do now is maybe to put a little bit of just a tiny border around each of the image containers. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to nest the gallery image in a gallery image container. And the gallery image container will be what contains many of the properties that are currently on our gallery image. So for instance, the padding, background, border radius, display, height, width, margin, position, and box shadow. And so now this padding, if we nest a gallery image div inside of our container, should provide us with that little bit of white space around each of the images. So let's go back into our index, view, and just go ahead and wrap this div in a div of class gallery image container. And then I'll move the span with the title and the list of tags outside of the container. And I'll just clean up some of this a little bit. And just double check our CSS. Go ahead and save this. And now go ahead and refresh the page. And we're not actually seeing our images here, so let's see what the issue is. We need to specify actually a height and a width on our gallery image as well. So we'll make these 280 by 280 pixels. And so yeah, we get the images out to their containers now. So the styling isn't perfect, but it just gives us kind of a very quick and dirty starting point. The next thing that I'll do is go back into index here and to our gallery content. I will also make this a row, so just kind of like a bootstrap row here. And then now that we understand that we are indeed passing the title and the collection of tags out with our model, I'll go ahead and remove those as well, and then refresh the page, and this should give us kind of more of a gallery look here. Okay, so we have our images out to our gallery view. So now what I'd like to do is to go ahead and first of all, we'll make a commit because we didn't make a commit in the last video. And now what I'm going to do is create a new project here for our services. So we need to stop the server, and then I'll go ahead and create it here. So we'll add a project, and I'm going to call out simple image gallery .services. And again, we can rename the default class here. So the first service that we'll create will be our image service. So let's just go ahead and rename class 1 to image service. And we want it to implement an interface iImage. So first of all, let's rename the actual file to image service. And then in our data project will be where we actually specify this interface. So we'll go ahead and create a new class, and we'll make it an interface, and we'll call it iImage. Okay, we'll make this interface public. And then over in our image service, you can see that we now need to actually provide a reference to our data projects. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll add a new reference. We'll select our data project and select OK. And now we can go ahead and import that namespace. And so let's go ahead and decide what methods we would like to define on this iImage interface. So we have a relatively simple idea for this application. So I don't want to overcomplicate things. We'll just have a few different methods in this service that we could actually implement later on in our controller. So maybe we'll provide the ability for whatever implements this interface to return a collection of our images. And for this, we need to import the correct namespace for this as well. And we can just have a method that gets all of the images. We'll have a method that returns a particular image by its ID. And then maybe we'll also have the ability to return a collection of images by a particular query that corresponds to some tags that might be on that image. And so we'll have a method that we can pass a string that will then return a collection of gallery images that contain a tag whose description corresponds with the tag that we pass, this getWithTag method. And this will be enough to start with. We could definitely either refactor or create new methods or change the overload for this method as we develop the application, but this should be enough to get us started. So if we go down to our image service, we can then control period to implement that interface that we just created. And if you're using ReSharper, you'll see some options here. Otherwise, it should just go ahead and populate the methods that are required to implement this interface. And so what we're going to do now is create a constructor for our service. And we'll provide it with our DB context. And then we'll create a field here, private read-only field. And then in the constructor, we'll just go ahead and set it. And so what we can do now is in our getAll method, we have a reference to this DB context. And so we can simply return ctx.galleryImages. And we can call include here, bringing in Entity Framework Core. And just go ahead and include the image tags along with our query. So now anytime we invoke this method to get all the gallery images from our database, we will also have their tags with them. So that's good. Let's go ahead and fill out this getById method next. In fact, I'd like to go ahead and just move this perhaps just below getAll. And here we can return ctx.galleryImages.find and we want to pass it an ID. So we need to pass an ID to our getById method. So we need to head back into our interface and actually pass that into the method here. Okay, so we can go back now to our service. And so this will return the instance of the gallery image that corresponds to the ID that we pass our getById method. And then finally, in our getWithTag method, we can simply call getAll.where the image.tags.any tag.description is equal to the tag description that will pass this method. And in fact, we should not name this tag since we're actually using that here as well as the parameter that we pass this method. And of course, we need to go ahead and return this also. And just clean it up a bit here. Okay, so here we should get all of the images where the tags on that image contain a description that matches this string that we pass our getWithTag method. So we'll be using this shortly in the future when we actually build out our search box that we can use to query our own images with. For now, let's go ahead and implement this getAll in order to actually get all of the images that might be in our database and display them in our gallery view. So we'll head back up into our web project, and then in our gallery controller, what I'm going to do is we can go ahead and remove some of this sample data that we created. So I'll minimize image list, collapse it, and go ahead and just delete it. Likewise with our tags. So we'll create a new image list. And what we're going to want to do is invoke an instance of this image service that we just created, the getAll method on that instance. And so what we need to do is actually, we're going to be using dependency injection to inject this service into our controller. So what we'll do, just at the top of our controller class, is have a private read-only image. We'll call it image service. And then we'll create a constructor for this class, which will actually have an image on it. So we'll call it our image service, and then we can set the field. So the controller doesn't really care about our service class per se. The controller only cares that it receives some class that implements the interface that we defined with these methods. And of course, our service implements this interface. And so now we just need to tell the application what to actually pass its controllers when it asks for a specific purpose, in this case, our image interface. So we can actually do that in our web project in the startup.cs file. So if you recall, down in our configure services method, we can now add a scoped service to this method. So what we can say is services.addScoped to our image service class. And for this, of course, now we're going to need to provide a reference in our web project to our service layer. So let's go ahead and right click on the project, and we'll add a reference to our services layer. And now I should be able to control period here and go ahead and import the missing reference. Okay, awesome. So now this is kind of nice. Again, leveraging dependency injection here. Our gallery controller, once again, is completely decoupled from our database. It just says, hey, I need some methods that do the following. I expect to be able to get all the images, get with a particular tag, and get with get by ID. I don't care what class is implementing it. And our startup here, when we configure services, we say, well, we're using our image service to actually implement this interface. And so anytime a controller or any other class here is asking for an implementation of our image service, it's going to get mapped to the concrete image service class that we just created. Okay, so now down in our index action here, I need to correct some spelling here. So now we're actually invoking that image service, and we're going to call getAll and use that to actually set the value of this images property that's on our view model. So our view model here has this images property, and it just takes this collection of gallery image, which is an entity model that can get returned from our database, and it's going to use that again to set this images property so that we can use the same view that we just constructed. This time, instead of having those mock objects, we'll actually be using whatever records are in our database, which is of course currently nothing. We just have an empty database with our schema. So I'll go ahead and make a commit here. You can see what we did with git status, and we'll go and git add everything and git commit, create service layer, implement image service in controller. So back in our gallery controller, this should work, but we should essentially return a page with some empty results. So let's go ahead and just fire up the server and confirm that's the case. And we'll just visit /gallery. And so yeah, you can see we just have an empty page because we don't actually have any records in our database. So let's fix that. We'll work locally first before we eventually wire things up with Azure blob storage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to revisit Pexels, and we'll search for some people skateboarding. And so let's just go ahead and download a small version of this image. And we'll go back and we'll download a small version of this image. And perhaps one more here. We'll download a small version of this image. And then what I'll do is I'll search for images of boats. Oops, I search for boar, which is not a boat. You could use boar images as well if you like. We'll go ahead and download this picture. And we'll do one more for our demo. We'll go ahead and grab this one. So it looks like a pretty cool boat. All right, so we've got 5 images downloaded. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna move those downloads into our static files here in the www root directory. So under the images folder, which should be created for you, since we use the template, I'm just gonna delete these banners. We can go ahead and just, stop the server first. And then just go ahead and, as I said, delete these banners. And then what I'm going to do is just navigate to my downloads where we just downloaded these images. And we'll go ahead and grab the 5 that we just downloaded. And I'm just going to drag those directly into this images directory. And I'm going to go ahead and rename them as well. So we have a couple boats, and then the rest of them are of people skating. So we'll have boat 1 and 2, and then skate 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do just to create some mock data for us is to actually run a SQL insert on our gallery image table. So let's go ahead and do that. We can just right click on the database and run a new query here. And if we select star from gallery images now, you can see that we have an empty table. First of all, also make sure that you are running it against the database simple image gallery or whatever you name the database for this particular series. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert into gallery images created, title, and URL, and you can see that URL is a keyword, so I'm just going to wrap that for safety in square brackets here, values, and now we need to write an insert here for each of the 5 images that we just dropped in our static files directory. So for created, we can just say get date, and then for title, we'll have like my new boat. And so you can see that it's going to be here under images /boat1.jpg. And so if we just provide the URL as /images boat1.jpg, that should work. And then we'll do the same for the other images here. So we had 5, we can say out sailing. This will be boat 2. And then we'll say skate park, skateboarding, and whatever else, skating. So not being very creative here with the titles, but just to show you how you could first run a manual insert to create some data to start working with, just to verify the functionality of your service layer. So we'll go ahead and run this insert. And we'll say 5 rows affected. So if we select from gallery images now, we can see those 5 rows. And so that's looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and minimize SQL Server. And so now when getAll gets called from our image service, it's going to use the DB context to actually query our database for all of our images. We don't have any tags yet, but that shouldn't matter at this point. So let's go ahead and just fire up the server. And so we'll just go ahead and visit /gallery. And so you can see that indeed we are getting those images back from our database. So these are getting served up directly from our static files directory. So that's pretty cool. Looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and fix up the nav bar now so that we can just visit gallery by clicking on, let's say, like the sort of like the home link here. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this and stop the server. You'll notice in the web project here in views, we have a shared directory, and then we have this layout folder or layout file here. And it's got a bunch of stuff scaffolded out for us. This actually represents the entire wrapper for all the views in this simple application. They get injected right here where we have this spiral render body method getting called. So this is Razor syntax once again to, in a sense, render any of the views in our application right here in this div. You can also see some other things in this file. We won't get into all the details for this simple series. In our case, all I'm going to do is just go ahead and, for our purposes, I'm just going to delete the div that contains the links at the top of the page, and we'll call the gallery controller index action here. You can see we're using ASP tag helpers here, which is really nice. So we're constructing an anchor tag here, a link, with the ASP controller set to gallery, ASP action set to index, and just using it sort of as a standard anchor tag with this kind of nice syntax. So it's just a basic anchor tag here, but Razor will actually interpret it and essentially provide you with the route that corresponds to this controller and action combination. So that's kind of nice. And that's fine. Our app can still be called Simple Image Gallery. That's cool. I'm going to go ahead and remove this button. And the other thing that I'll do is in our startup class, if we scroll down, we can say that we can see that we're setting the default controller to home. Let's set the default controller to the gallery index. So this way, when our application starts, we will just immediately hit the gallery index. So let's go ahead and try this out now. Okay, cool. So you can see that even though we're in the root of our application, it is serving up the gallery index action. And if we click on Simple Image Gallery, this is where we get taken. So we don't have any other views in the system right now. We need to create 2 of them. We need to create a detail view so that when we click on an image, we actually visit a detail view of that image. And we'll need to also create a form page so that we can actually upload new images from our computer to get displayed here. So what I'd like to do is to go ahead and wrap these in links so that when we click on them, we can then be taken over to a detail view where we can see a larger version of the image as well as its description and perhaps its tags as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So yeah, so here's our layout. And actually, while we're here in this layout page that I have open, so this is our layout.cshtml file, and if you need to find that again, that is once again in our shared directory inside of our views in our web project here. And while I have this open, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and actually create a link here in the nav bar to an upload page, which of course we haven't created yet, but it will serve as kind of a placeholder for that. And we might as well add it while we're here in the layout So directly after this div of class navbar header, where we have the title of our application, we go ahead and create another div, and we're going to just give it a navbar collapse, and then we're going to create an unordered list here with just a single item for now, but we'll go ahead and give the UL a class of nav, and then this navbar nav class as well. And then here we'll just have upload, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this in some tag helpers here. So this will be the ASP controller. And if you recall, the controllers that we currently have are just the gallery controller and the home controller. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create an image controller that will then have an upload action. So we'll say ASP action is equal to upload. And yeah, we just need upload to be inside of this anchor tag. And the list element should wrap the anchor tag. Since there's only one of them here, I'm just going to go ahead and put this out a separate line. Then if we take a look at the page and refresh it, we should now see this upload link, which currently leads nowhere because we don't have an image controller or an upload action. Okay, so now let's get back to the task of creating links around each of the images that appear in our gallery and then having those take us over to a detail view. So for that, we need to go into our views and then the gallery, our index view here. And you can see that we have this for each where we're iterating over the collection of images that's on our view model. And we're currently just putting out this div of class gallery image container. And then we have a container for the image itself where we're setting the background image URL equal to the URL property that's on any particular image. And so quite simply here, I can just create another tag helper. And we're going to use the gallery controller in this case. We could use the image controller as well and have like an image/detail action. I don't mind putting this in the gallery controller. We have a pretty minimal application as it is. So then we'll say ASP action is equal to detail. And then we are going to need to tell the controller action which image in our collection to display on the detail page. So what we can do is just go ahead and say ASP route ID is equal to @image.id. Okay, so if we just save that, and then if I go refresh the page here, you can see now that these are clickable elements. And if you take a look down and at the bottom of your browser where these are leading, you can now see that they will be corresponding to the ID that's on each of these images. So if I click it, we're currently getting taken nowhere because we need to go ahead and create this action now. So I'm going to go back and I'll minimize the browser. And now I'm just going to go ahead and stop the server. And I'm going to make a quick commit. So bring this over. And now I'll mention this also in the comments below, but between the third video and this video, I had done a recording and then I lost some of the video files. And so I had to kind of work backwards. And so I'm on a separate branch here because I had been a little bit further along in the code. So that's why this is on a different branch here and why you don't see master. In any case, just a minor note in case you're wondering. So we can go ahead and say that we added these and we can commit, add upload link to navbar, links around gallery images. And we'll just go ahead and push those. Okay, so now let's go into our gallery controller. And as you recall, we have this image service that we have injected into our controller. This allows us to grab the images. We can also use it to grab an instance of an image, a particular image by its ID, which is exactly what we'll do for our detail view. So currently we have this index action. Let's go ahead and create an action result detail, and we'll have an int ID, which will be the ID that corresponds to the image that we want to visit. And so we'll go ahead and store a reference to that image in a variable here. So we'll just call it the image, and we can invoke our image service to get by ID the ID that we pass this detail method. And so you can see that this is going to pull back an instance of one of our gallery image objects, and we're just going to push that into a view model. We could pass the entity object itself sort of as a domain model to this page, but I like to make view models for each of my pages. So we'll say that the model is equal to a new gallery detail model. And let's go ahead and actually create this model. So this again is a view model, and it's going to be here in our web project in the models namespace, so in our models folder here. So I'm going to right click and just simply add a new class, gallery detail model. And what we'll do is, this is essentially for now, just for this simple app here, it's really going to map one-to-one to our domain model. So we'll have an ID property that we need. And something that someone has mentioned in the comments recently, which is kind of nice if you prefer to use it, it's a little shortcut here where you can type prop, and it's a code snippet in Visual Studio. If you're coding in Visual Studio, then if I hit tab twice here, then this kind of scaffolds out a simple property for us here. I'm using Vim, and so it's just about as fast, or at least as comfortable for me to just type it or to copy and paste a bunch of properties at once too. So whatever suits your personal preference, but just to know, just a little code snippet that you may want to be aware of, particularly if you are building larger Pogo classes out. So we'll go ahead and create the title property for our image. And we can also create like a list of strings for the image tags. And for that, we need to go ahead and bring in collections. All right, so if we just recall the actual image model in our data project here, where we actually specify the entity model, gallery image, we also have a created on, we have this enumerable collection of image tags. In our case, if we have F12 here, we can see that a tag is just an ID and a description. For our view model, the tags for, as far as the viewer is concerned, are just strings, and so we're just going to simplify that in our view model. When the user clicks on the image detail view, they can just see a list of strings regarding the image tags. Okay, and the URL here is the URL which represents the path on disk, whether locally or remotely, to the image itself. So let's go back to our view model that we were just working on, and I think I will also here include the datetime for the created, and of course the URL. So this maps, as I said, almost one-to-one to our entity model. I just prefer to keep it separate just because we're using view models in other places in the application, and I just tend to like to keep my entity models separate and use them strictly for the purpose of designing the overall architecture for the application. And then things like our view models basically consume some of their properties, and then can maybe be any number of different combination of properties on any number of those models. But if you're building something extremely simple, which in fact we are, then you may even just consider using the entity models here in the view. Okay, so let's head back into our gallery controller. And so now let's populate our model. So the ID will clearly be the image ID. The title will be the image title. Created on, likewise. Actually, I caught it created in the entity model, that's fine. URL is equal to image.url. And then for our tags, so what we have here on our view model again is a collection of strings, or more specifically a list of strings. But the tags that are on our image object are actually a collection of our tag model. So this image tag entity model. And so what we can do is just simply call like select here. And we'll say like t.description.toList. And so we could put this in a separate method if we want to kind of clean up the construction of this view model. But it's pretty simple. So we're just basically getting all of the descriptions for each of the images that are in this tags collection and then dumping them into a list and then setting the tags property on our detail model to that list. So it's pretty straightforward. So we can just go ahead and return the model to our view, and I'll just fix my typo here. So this is an extremely simple action result, basically just getting an image by ID from our database by means of our image service that we've injected into this controller, and then mapping all the properties that we get back from that image from our database onto properties that we define in this specific view model. So now what we need to do is to go ahead and create a corresponding view for this. So in our views folder here, under gallery, we're going to go ahead and create a new view. And I like to do this manually. So we'll just do MVC view page here. And this we have to call detail. And I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up. And we'll define our model. As our gallery detail model that we just created. And remember that our views get rendered inside of our layout. So if we revisit our layout here and we see this render body method, this razor method that's getting called here inside of this container body content. So anything, just as a reminder here, anything that we're creating in our detail view here is already getting rendered in our view directly here. Okay, so back in our detail view, what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a div of class container body content. Again, this could and may very well already be on the outside of our view, but just because I recall using it here on the index page, we'll just be consistent. I'm going to go ahead and create a row. And now we just need to display our image, a large version of this image on the page. So I'm going to create a CSS class here called image detail container, which we have yet to define, but we will. And then we have a div of class image detail. And here's where we'll actually put an image tag. So the image tag will be the URL on the model. And then we can also specify alternate text here with alt at model.title. And so that way when the user hovers the mouse over the image, they get this alternate text, which will correspond to the title. Okay, and then I'll create another row here, div class row. And we'll have a span where we can say title at model.title again. And then below it here, we'll have a second span where we can say uploaded. And here we'll have our model.created on. Okay, and then I'm just going to have a final row here. And here I'm just going to provide a link back to the gallery. So we'll style it as a button, and we can use Bootstrap's button primary. ASP controller is equal to gallery. ASP action is equal to index. And we can just say back to gallery. Okay, and I'll create a custom CSS class here called, let's see, just controls maybe. And then here we'll have one called image metadata or something. Maybe image detail meta. Okay, so with that, let's just go ahead and fire up the server and check it out. All right. So if we click on an image, looks like we are hitting something in our code here. and we're getting a null reference exception here. Let's see where we're getting that. So image.tags is null. Our URL is populated, created, title, and ID are all populated, but our image tags are null. So let's go ahead and fix that. So what we need to do, first of all, we need to stop the server, but then we need to head into our image service. And before we do that, I'm also going to clean up these usings. Okay, so now we need to head into our image service, which implements this interface. But if you just F12 here, you'll just be taken to the interface that our service implements. So we need to head into our service project and then click image service here. Okay, so what I need to do is to actually call include here when we find this image. So what's happening is that this image is getting found, but its navigation property tags is not actually getting populated. And so we need to explicitly include those tags here in our query. So rather than find by ID, what I'm simply going to do here is actually return get all, and then I'll say where the image.id is equal to this ID, and then we can call first. And so what this is doing is it's just reusing this get all method here that we have already, where we already have this include called. Otherwise we'd just be repeating some code here, where the image ID is equal to the ID that we pass, the get.id method, and then just grabbing the first from that collection. So even though there's only one ID in our database, which corresponds to the ID that we would pass here because it's a primary key, where is always going to return a collection of objects. And so since we need this method to return an instance of a gallery image and not a collection of it, we just call first and grab the only element in that collection. Okay, so let's go ahead and start the server again. All right, so we'll click on an image. And so yeah, this is looking a little bit better already. So I'll leave it to you if you'd like to do some additional styling on this page. But for now, we can confirm that functionally it does appear to be working. Okay, and I had to reload some styles here, so sorry about that. Okay, and sorry about that. I just had to reload some of my CSS styles here. So if you've been following along since the beginning of this series, then your image gallery should be styled like this as well, with each of these images inside a container, if you will, with this drop shadow. So likewise, the style on your gallery detail page may look something more like this. As I said, you may want to add some additional styles here just to clean things up. So what I'd like to do now is to go ahead and create an upload form so that we can actually upload images and then store them remotely on Azure. So the first thing that we need to do is to just go ahead and, well, first of all, stop the server here if it's running. And we're going to create a new controller. But first, I'm going to go ahead and make a commit here. And normally I don't like to store images in source control, but just for the purposes of this video, I'll leave them here. So we added the gallery detail model and the detail view. And we also included tags in get by ID. That's in our image service. Okay, so with that taken care of, we can just go ahead and head back into the code here. I'm just going to close a bunch of these open windows here. So we're just going to close all documents and minimize some of this as well. And in fact, if you just click this collapse all button, that makes it a lot easier. And now we'll head into our controllers. And what I'm going to do is create a new image controller here. So we're going to add a controller, and we'll make it an empty MVC controller. Call it image controller. So I'll control period to remove some of these usings. And then if you recall, actually in our layout, so here in the shared directory in our views, I created a link to our upload view here, and I specified that it would be in the image controller and then the upload action. So let's just go ahead and create an upload action here. And we'll create a new view model. And then we know we're going to return this model ultimately to the view. So let's go ahead and create our view model. And we'll add it to our models namespace. And we're just going to call it, as we did here, upload image model. And it's going to be a pretty small model. We'll have a string for the image's title, and just call it title. And then we'll have some tags, which will represent as a string here. And what we'll do is we'll have a user who'd like to upload an image, specify some tags like comma separated in a form text field, and then we'll have some logic in our controller or in a service layer somewhere where we'll actually parse out each of the tags that are separated by commas. And then we can apply those to the new image object that we create. And then the next thing that we'll have here is an iForm file, image upload. And this is going to be a really useful type. It's going to come from Microsoft ASP Netcore HTTP. And so we can bring that in. And then back in our image controller, we don't actually need to set anything on this upload image model. So we're going to be presenting the user with an empty form, and then it will be actually up to the user to fill that form out and then actually post it back to another action result that we could place in our controller here, which is going to handle all of the assigning of the properties that the user provides to the new object that will get created. And so for that, we'll need to create a post method, HTTP post, so we can use this attribute here. And we'll call this upload new image. And for now, we can just return OK. We are going to actually put all of the logic of handling what happens after the user posts an image here in this HTTP post method. But what I'd like to do very quickly is to now just go ahead and create the view that we can hit that will contain our form where we can upload an image. So here in views, I'm going to create a new folder actually called image. And then inside image here, we'll go ahead and create our view. And this we'll call upload so that it matches our upload action result. Okay. So here, we'll specify the model. Again, this will be our upload image model. And again, we'll keep it quite simple like our other views in this app. So we'll have a row, and we'll call this an upload container. That'll be a custom CSS class we can use. And then we'll have a div of class form. Actually, I'm just going to call this upload form. And we'll apply our drop shadow. And now we'll actually place our form element here. So what we can do is we can actually specify tag helpers here as well. So we can have an ASP action is equal to upload new image. And then we need to specify a method of post so that it can submit this form as a post request. And just to double check on the image controller, yeah, we called this action upload new image, and we supplied the HTTP post attribute here. The next thing that I need to do is specify this encoding type here, or enc type. And here we need to declare it as multi-part / form data. So the enc type attribute here just specifies the content type that's used to submit the form. And so like the value of our method is post, and so now we can provide a specific enc type. And so multi-part form data is what you would use whenever you want to submit something like a file up through a form from the client side. So that's why we'll be using multi-part / form data with our post request. If you didn't have this here, then the image wouldn't actually get sent with the request. Okay, and finally I'm going to give this form an ID as well. And we'll just call it upload form. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up just a bit as well. And here we'll have a div class form group. Oops, form group from Bootstrap. And let's create a label for, so this would be label ASP4 title. And so you pass ASP4 here, just one of the properties on your model. And then we can provide our input and do the same. And I'm going to give this a class form control here as well. Okay, I'm going to create a second form group here. So I'll just copy and paste this. And then what I can do instead of title here is just delete both of these. And then we will create a label and input for our tags. And then finally, we need to be able to actually allow the user to upload an image. So I'm going to create a third div here. And we're going to specify a label with class button, button default, and button file, which will be a custom CSS class. And here we'll say like browse for image. And then here we'll specify our input. So we can say type is equal to file, name is equal to file, and then here's a little trick. We can actually set this an inline style here of display none. Just because the default input for uploading files through a form doesn't really look that good, and so instead we'll just kind of hide it and provide this button to allow users to click and browse for the image. Okay, and then finally here we'll have a div of class submit, and we'll have a button of type submit. ID will be our upload button or button upload, and the class will be a Bootstrap button, button info. Okay, so let's take a look at what this looks like now. So we'll fire up the server. And if we click upload, we can see our simple form here. Again, we don't have any custom styling on it. And I think in this case, I might like to add just a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we need to head over into our CSS. And one thing I'm going to do is I created this box shadow. Let's move this over here so we can kind of take a look at the code or the markup and the CSS at the same time. So I specified this drop shadow CSS class here. And so what I'm going to do is take the box shadow out of our gallery image container, create a new class called drop shadow, and then just paste in the box shadow that I'd already specified here inside of this dedicated drop shadow property. And then what I can do is I'll just view the Solution Explorer again. And if we head back into our gallery index, so if we go here to views and then our gallery index, this div class gallery image container, I'm also just now going to add our drop shadow class to. Because the drop shadow is something that I would probably like to use on more than one element throughout the application. So we'll just have a dedicated CSS class for it here. Okay, so we'll unpin our Solution Explorer again. And the other thing that I'll do while we're in here editing CSS is first of all correct this typo. But I'll also go ahead and add styles for the CSS classes that I declared on our image detail view as well. So we'll have this image detail container just with some really simple stuff here. So we'll just do text align left. And then we had an image detail class where I'm just going to provide a little bit of padding and border radius. And then we had this metadata row on our detail page, which included the image title or description, if you will, and then the created on date or uploaded date. So we'll provide a bit of padding there as well. Okay, so now on our upload page here, let's kind of work, I guess, from bottom to top here. So we have this submit button. So we had a class submit, and here I'm just going to provide a tiny bit of padding. This button file, I think I'll just provide a little bit of margin around it. So we'll say margin of like 6 pixels. Then our upload form here, where we can see that this is a form element and we had an ID of upload form. So we can say upload form, provide some padding. We'll provide auto margins and a width of 50%. So that's going to kind of keep things centered. And then finally, I had this all inside of this row of class upload container, where I'll just provide another little bit of padding here. So I realize that there's some duplicate CSS here. I'm just going to leave this here that you can then go through and further customize to your liking. So come here, I'm gonna just reload. Yeah, and that's not it's not really necessarily beautiful or anything, but it does start to slightly clean things up. So you can see that we can provide a title, like sample image. Let's say that we were going to upload images of like mountains. So we might say like mountain, camping, hiking, and then we could browse for the image. We could select one, and then we could submit our form. So we obviously don't have anything happening yet inside of our post method, so let's go ahead and start to wire that up. So I'll go ahead and close the CSS for now, and we'll pin the Solution Explorer back. So we'll head into our image controller, and let's go ahead and just set a breakpoint here on our post method of upload new image. All it's going to do is just return like an HTTP 200 response back, just to say that everything is working. But of course, we don't have anything happening in this method. Nonetheless, let's just set a breakpoint here, and what I'll do is just go ahead and submit the form. And so you can see we hit a breakpoint here. So the HTTP post is indeed working. If we just hit F5 to go through, we obviously have an empty response here. Next, we will actually complete this HTTP post upload new image method and wire it up so that we can actually post the file contents from that form up to Azure in order to store it in blob storage. So I've got the server running here, and we're just going to go take a look at the page. This was the upload page that we had worked on. So we're going to be able to supply a title as well as perhaps some comma separated tags, and then we can browse for an image on our computer and then submit it. And what we'd like to do is to actually have this submit to file storage on Azure. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can get all that set up. So what I'm going to do now is head over to the Azure portal as it looks today, and I believe you can sign up for a free account, and the free account will give you access to some services for a limited period of time or within a certain budget that Microsoft will provide you if you're signing up for the first time. So I've got an actual paid Azure account here, but like I said, this should be free to get started if you don't yet have an account. So go ahead and create an account if you don't have one yet. And once you do, head over to portal.azure.com, get logged in, and at the time of this recording, the dashboard should look something like you see here. And what we're going to do is go over to storage accounts, and we're going to go ahead and create a new storage account. So I'm just going to click add here, and this is going to take you through a little wizard here where we can just supply some information about the storage account we'd like to create. So I'm just going to go ahead and create mine here. We're just going to call it dev image gallery. We'll keep the deployment model as resource manager and the account kind as general purpose. I'm going to make the performance standard, and for replication we're also just going to use the default read access geo-redundant storage. We won't require secure transfer for this demo, and I'm going to use the pay-as-you-go subscription, but like I said, if you have a free account, then be sure to take advantage of that here. You should see some option to use your free subscription. Go ahead and create a new resource group, and I'll leave my location as Central US. So at the very bottom, I'm also going to select pin to dashboard, and then we'll go ahead and create it. So this should just take a few seconds. So once the form submits, you should get this little animation here letting you know that the storage account is currently being deployed. And this will take a few seconds to a minute or so to complete. Okay, so once it's complete, you should see an icon here on your dashboard. If you didn't click Pin to Dashboard, then you can also access it from the storage accounts link here, and you should see it in the table. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here. And now you can see some information about your account, the resource group, the status and the location, that sort of thing. And so now we want to check out our access keys. So go ahead and select access keys from settings. And what we're after here is our connection string. So we're just going to go ahead and grab the first connection string that we have here, and we're going to copy it to the clipboard. So you're going to want to make sure you keep these keys secure. What I'm going to do is actually store these in user secrets. So we're going to use this connection string to have our application connect to our new storage account. But what we can do is actually use something called user secrets with ASP.NET in order to keep our connection string out of our code base. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we'll do that. So I'm going to leave this window open. I'm just going to minimize it. And what we're going to do first is actually just install the Secret Manager tool in our application. So we're just going to right click on the web project here, in this case Simple Image Gallery, and we're going to go ahead and edit the CS Proj. Now among the item groups where we have .NET CLI tool references, I'm just going to add another tool reference here. So the string for our include will be Microsoft.extensions.secretmanager.tools. And at the time of this video, I'll be using version 2.0.0. I'm just going to go ahead and save, and then I'm going to go ahead and rebuild the solution. And for that, we should stop debugging, of course. And so the first thing that happens here is that the NuGet packages are getting restored, including the new package that we've added here to our CS Proj for managing user secrets. So now what we should be able to do is if we right click on the web project again, we should have the option to manage user secrets. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And what we see here now is a secrets.json file that's currently empty. Well, we have the opening and closing curly brackets, but otherwise we don't have any key value pairs for our user secrets here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add my connection string for my storage account here as a key value pair in this JSON file. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this Azure Storage connection string. And then here I'm going to go ahead and paste that connection string. So be sure to generate your own, and as I mentioned, don't share it with anyone. I'm going to go ahead and remove this connection string as soon as I'm done with this part of the video. If we head back into the CS Proj, you'll also notice that what we've done has generated this user secrets ID node and sort of auto-generated something like a GUID here, but this could really be anything. So the way this is working is that the Secret Manager tool is basically storing this JSON file, not with our solution anywhere, but actually on our system. So on Windows, this is going to be somewhere in our app data folder, and then in like the Microsoft folder, and then there's a folder called user secrets. So it's not related to our solution. The user secrets tool will handle all the implementation details regarding using the connection string that we specified here. So as long as we have the key value pair stored here, what I can do is basically reference the Azure Storage connection string key here whenever I'm looking for the connection string. We're going to go ahead and close our secrets.json. Again, the user secrets ID here is actually just going to be the name of the folder in our app data directory where that user secret is stored on our system. You could rename it here and have it be something completely different. But I'm just going to leave it as it is. And we'll go ahead and close our CS Proj. Now, if we head back into our image controller, we're going to use our application's configuration to simply access our new user secret. So what I'm going to do is create a private field at the top of our image controller class. and it'll be of type iConfiguration. And so for this, we need to bring in Microsoft extensions .configuration. And I'm just going to call this field _config. And I'm also going to create a field which is just a string called our Azure connection string. And this we just need to have an accessor for. So we're just going to actually get this. And now we'll go ahead and create our constructor so that we can use or leverage dependency injection to get the configuration for our application. Okay, Azure connection string is equal to _config, and then we just need to pass it the string that we named the key in our secrets.json file, which was just Azure storage connection string. Okay, so now we can just make use of that here in our image controller class. So we're going to need to actually perform a series of steps here to actually get access to our dev image gallery. If we head down where we see blob service here, and we have this option to see the various containers that we might create for our storage account. We don't have any containers yet, and you can see that it's going to say click plus container to get started here. So let's go ahead and add one. And we're going to call this images. And for the public access level, I'm just going to go ahead and set this to blob, and we'll say OK. So now we have this new images container on our storage account. So let's go ahead and minimize here. And let's start to write the various methods that we need to actually connect to that blob storage from our controller action. So I'm going to store our container in a var here. And I'm actually going to delegate this responsibility to our image service. And we're going to have a method on it called getBlobContainer, which is going to take our connection string and the name of the storage container that we just created, which was images. So let's go ahead and use dependency injection to inject an instance of our image service. So we'll go ahead and bring in the using for that from our services namespace. Create the private field here. And we'll set it in our constructor. Okay, so now we have access to a valid image service. And so we just need to write this method getBlobContainer. So I'm going to go ahead and control period here to go ahead and just generate that method. Then we can F12 to go over to it. So the way this is going to work is we're just going to go ahead and store a var for our storage account. So we'll have this cloud storage account, and we can go ahead and bring this in by adding a reference to Microsoft.WindowsAzure.storage. And here we should be able to simply call .parse and pass it our connection string. Next, we're going to store our blob client in a var. So we'll use our storage account, and we're just going to go ahead and create a cloud blob client. Now we need to return a reference to that container that we just created. So we'll return blob client.getContainerReference, reference, and we're going to pass it the string v here, which was just named automatically. If we go back into our image controller here, that string v actually corresponds to the name of the container that we'd like a reference to. So what I'm going to do is head back here, and we're going to call this container name, and we're going to go ahead and use it to get our container reference. And more specifically than just an object, this will return a cloud blob container object. So for this, we need to bring in Windows Azure.storage.blob. And so all this method is doing is returning a reference to the particular blob container that we're after. Or in order to get that container reference, we need to have a valid storage account, which we can access using our connection string. And then we use this cloud blob client object in order to get a direct reference to the container of the name that we specified. So let's go back into our image controller now. Now we're going to be uploading an image, so the next thing that we want to do is to actually parse what's called the content disposition response header. So let's store the content disposition in a var. We'll just call this content. And for this, we can use content disposition header value. And we'll need to go ahead and bring in HTTP headers. And here we can parse the file that we're uploading. Oops, and of course, upload new image needs to actually take that. So as an argument, so we're going to go ahead and use iForm file for this. And we need to bring in ASP.NET Core HTTP. And now content disposition header value.parse will take our file's content disposition. Now from this, we should be able to grab the file name that's being uploaded. Note that we have other properties that we can access here as well, including just simply the name. We have file name star, we have the size and the read date, a few other things here, creation date, that might be useful, depending on the structure of your application. In our case, we're just going to go ahead and grab the file name. And you'll notice that when it comes back, it's going to come back with some quotes around it. So what we need to do is to actually trim those quotes. So we've got our container. We're grabbing the file name from the upload that's coming from our form. Now we need to do a few other things here. First of all, we need to get a reference to a blob. And we can grab that off of our container object. So we'll just use the method getBlockBlob reference. Go ahead and pass it our file name. And then we can simply upload it. So to do that, we can call on our blob, upload from stream async. And we're going to allow all this to happen asynchronously. So we'll go ahead and await this. We're going to make this, instead of an iAction result, we're going to make it an async task. iAction result type. And we won't return OK. And of course, to use task, we need to also bring in system.threading. And upload from stream async is a method that we need to go ahead and pass our file, and we can call open read stream on our file to pass it the stream that it requires to be uploaded. And the other thing that I'm going to do here is also go ahead and use our image service to set our image. And we're going to go ahead and pass it the title from our form, the tags, as well as the location that has been reserved for our image in blob storage. And for that, we can grab blockblob.uri. And then finally, we're going to return redirect to action. Index, and then we'll just return back to our gallery. So now we need to go ahead and write this setImage method on our image service. So let's head into our image service. So let's go ahead and control period here to generate that method. Then we'll head into our image service and check it out. So this is actually going to receive a string title and then a string tags that we'll need to basically parse based on like a comma delimiter and then the URI value. So if we go back, in addition to the file in upload new image, we're also passing in those tags and we're passing in the title of the gallery image. Okay, so we'll F12 to get back to set image. And what we need this to do is to basically create a reference to that new image in our SQL database. So whereas previously, if we select star from images, select star from gallery images, you can see that the URLs were all these relative paths to some local image that we had in our www root folder. We now need this URL to point to the URL where we now need this URL to point to the location where the images are hosted in our Azure blob storage database. So let's go ahead and minimize this. So what we're going to say is var image is equal to a new gallery image object where the title is simply the title string. The tags, we're going to create a new method for parse tags and we'll pass it the string tags. The URL will be the URI. The created will be just datetime.now. Just to keep things relatively simple. And URI, we actually need to go ahead and grab the absolute URI value. Okay, so once we've built up this new gallery image object, we can simply call on our context and go ahead and add this object. And then save changes. And we'll save changes async here and go ahead and await it. So we'll make our task async. And now all we have left to do is to parse these tags that we pass as a string. And we're going to pass this from the form as simply a comma separated list of image tags. So we're going to create a public list of image tags. And it's going to take as an argument, obviously, our string tags. This should be pretty simple. All that we need to do is to create a tag list. And we'll basically say tags.split on the comma. And we'll call .toList here. And then what we can do is iterate over that list. We can say for each var tag in tag list, we're going to add that to a list of image tag objects. So let's new up an empty list of image tags. And so what we can do is we can say image tags.add, and we're going to add a new image tag where the description is simply the tag. And now we can return our image tags list. We could also refactor this into something a little bit simpler. Using link, on our to list here, we could select a new image tag for each of them, where we just set the description equal to tag. This should also work, and that makes things a little bit simpler. And now we can actually just return this. And rather than toList called here, what I'll do is call toList at the end here. And that should make it happy. Okay, so pretty simple method to parse tags given a string of comma separated tags provided by our user. And so that should take care of setting the image in our database. We head back into our image controller. We can kind of see how this is going to work. Our user will submit a form that passes up a file in the form of this iForm file object. The form is also going to contain fields for some tags and an image title. And we're going to use our image service to get a reference to our images container using our Azure connection string. We need to go ahead and parse the content disposition of the file that we're passing up so that we can grab the file name. We trim off some unnecessary quotations. Then we get a reference to what's called a blob here. We get that reference by passing it the file name that we grabbed off of the file that's getting uploaded. And then we call upload from stream async there to actually pass that file up to our Azure storage. We also take care of things in our own database here, which simply creates a reference to that image using the URI that's coming back from Azure, as well as the title and the tags that the user has set using the form. And we handle all of that in our image service with the setImage method that we were just looking at. So finally, we redirect to the index action on our gallery controller. So the next thing I want to do is just go ahead and set a breakpoint here, and we're going to start the application. So I'm going to head over to our upload form, and we're going to get an exception here that says invalid operation exception, unable to resolve service for type simple image gallery services image service when attempting to activate our image controller. So what's happening here is we need to make sure that we actually register our service in our startup class. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll head over to startup.cs. If we scroll down to where we have configure services, it looks like we are adding a scoped service of type image service. So yeah, I actually wrote the constructor wrong in our image controller. So we'll scroll up. We need this to get past an iImage service. So we're going to go ahead and stop this. And so this takes the interface iImage. And so we'll go ahead and control period to bring in a reference to that interface. And we'll do the same here for our fields so that we can set the value. And we'll do the same here for our field, private field, so that it can be set properly. And so as you can see in our startup class, when we're using dependency injection, anytime our controllers are asking for something that implements the methods that are defined on this iImage interface, it's going to inject a scoped image service. And since we've configured our services this way, we need to make sure that we are using the interface here in our constructor, just like we used in our gallery controller as well. If we head back there, you can see that in the constructor for our gallery controller, we are indeed also using the iImage interface here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to start the server up again. And so now I can also remove the reference to simpleimagegallery.services. And now that we're passing in an interface, we need to go ahead and make sure that the methods that we created on the service are also defined on the interface. We kind of did that backwards, or I did it backwards. So our image service has 3 new methods on it. It's got this cloud blob container type, get blob container, which takes a string connection string. And for this, we just need to make sure that we bring in, once again, Microsoft Windows Azure storage.dll. So we actually need to add a reference to that. We've got a task set image, which takes a string title, string tags, and URI. So we need to go ahead and bring in our system namespace, and we'll also bring in system.threading. And then finally, we also have a method that returns a list of image tags called parse tags, which just takes in the string of tags. Okay, with that, we have now defined the new methods that we provided on our image service, which implements this interface. And so that should now be satisfied. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring this back into a single pane. And it's looking like it's saying that we are not implementing the interface member getBlob container string. Oh, I see. We also need to modify iImage to pass in our container name as well as a string. Okay, so if we go back into our image service, that's looking pretty good. So we'll head into our image controller, and we've got our breakpoint set here on the post method. So I'm just going to go ahead and start the server back up again. Okay, so let's head over to our upload form, and we're just going to call this test image. And for tags, we'll say hiking and adventure. We'll go ahead and browse for an image. I'll select this one, and we'll just go ahead and click submit. So now you can see that we have a reference to our file as an iForm file. You see that we have the file name and the content type, as well as this content disposition. We've got our tags being sent up here as this string, and we have the title as well. So let's hit F10, and we'll try to implement our image service to get a reference to the blob container. So now we have this container object. You can see the storage URI, which contains the URI to our storage account that we'd set up. I'm going to hit F10 here to get the content, and then F10 again to get the file name. So you can see the file name is hike.jpg. Now we're going to get a reference to a block blob. And so we can see that object here. And then we'll call upload from stream async here. Now we're going to use our image service to actually set that image in our database. And then finally, we'll redirect to the gallery. So I'm just going to hit F5. And now we're back in our gallery. And indeed, you can see the new image that we have here in our gallery is the one that we just uploaded. So we can click on it. We can see it full size. We can go back to the gallery. And note that if we inspect this, we can see that the image source is now coming from devimagegallery.blob.core.windows.net, which is indeed hosted on Azure, whereas these other images here are hosted locally. So if we go into our database and we select star from gallery images again, we can see that indeed the URL for our test image here is pointing to our blob storage on Azure. So that's pretty cool. We can also now select star from image tags, and we can see that we have some new records for the tags that we parsed. I can see that we have a slight bug in that we're including a space here. So we also need to go ahead and trim out spaces when we parse tags. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. Note also something pretty important here is that we don't have the connection string that we use to connect to Azure anywhere in source code. So that's currently just stored locally on the development machine that we're working on. And so we don't need to actually worry about having that checked into source control. If you were deploying this to a server somewhere, say a separate dev environment or like staging or production, and you were running your app on one of those machines, then you might have secrets stored specifically on those servers, either as environment variables or through some other means. But for development purposes, this is really nice that we can actually use cloud storage and not share our connection string publicly. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.